The moment has finally come. After 2 years of cruising Caribbean waters, today we are taking Tarka through the Panama Canal to go see the Pacific Ocean. A lot went into this day, so let's quickly review everything we did to prepare for this moment. First, we got our boat measured, did a bunch of paperwork to make sure Tarka was safe and capable of a transit, and got our official number giving us a green light. Next, we paid a bunch of money to the local bank, both to cover our transit fees and give the canal authorities a buffer amount in case we incur any delays or damages. For Tarka, we made sure she was in tip-top shape, and we even motored up and down the breakwater for several hours at high speed to make sure the engine was happy. We don't want any surprises when it really counts. Tarka also went on a diet for the big day. We're leaving most of our water tanks empty and only carrying enough for the transit. We also offloaded several hundred pounds of books, gear, rope, and other things we don't really need for the next few days. That gave us some breathing room for our first essential addition, our oversized lines and fenders needed for a safe, Canal Authority approved transit. Next, we added 3 human additions to the boat in the form of line handlers. They are all, not so coincidentally, French backpackers that we found through Facebook. Agatha is our most experienced crew member and has made many transits. The other 2, Arnaud and Anthony, don't have canal experience, but are high-spirited and eager for an adventure, and that's what really counts. And that's where we stand now as we wait for our advisor to be dropped off so that we can begin our transit. Our trip through the canal is going to be basically identical to the one we did with our Kiwi friends a few weeks back. East to west transits, well, actually they're technically north to south, are conducted over the course of 2 days. The first evening we will work our way up the Gatun locks and then spend our night moored in the lake. The next day, we will race across the giant man-made lake that makes up the majority of the Panama Canal, and then downlock at the Pedro Miguel locks, followed by the single Miraflores lock. If all goes well, we'll be anchored outside of Panama City in the Pacific Ocean just after sunset tomorrow. Transits don't happen without an advisor though, and right on schedule, ours was delivered to us by a pilot boat. I think he was a bit shocked to see how little the boat he'd be transiting on today was, and maybe just a little bit nervous. With our advisor aboard, it was anchors up and we were on our way. The other 2 boats that we are transiting with today are already on their way to the locks. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't playing nicely with us, and we motored against the headwind and prepared to get wet. In addition to the wind, we were also going to get a bit of a current flowing out of the locks, so we weren't exactly speeding along. But fortunately, our advisor had no complaints. He just wanted us to stay as close to the red markers as humanly possible. We're trying to stay out of the way of the big ships, like these ones. It's just 2-way traffic here, and the lane isn't all that wide. Eventually the rain subsided and we continued to cruise up the lane towards the locks. Things can get a little rolly from the wake of the large passing ships, and Tarka, a fairly light boat that she is, gets a little bit topsy-turvy. As we got closer to the first set of locks, we joined up with the other 2 boats that we'd be rafting up with today. They're each about twice the length of Tarka, which means we're definitely not going to be put in the center of this raft. We let them get tied up and sorted first. When rafting, we're sort of just at the mercy of the current, as you can't really maneuver until you're secured to each other. I'm always pretty nervous about bringing Tarka close to anything expensive, and this definitely qualifies. But fortunately, the rafting went smoothly, and we were tied up to the raft before we even knew it. There were a few things we needed to adjust to make our neighbors a bit more comfortable, like swinging the boom to the other side. But otherwise we were ready to continue, as we got chatty with our new friends.
9,000 miles, no more or less from here?
From here, yeah, altogether it's about 16.
Since Tarka is so much smaller than the other boats, we got lucky and didn't have to use Tarka's lines at all. Instead, Tarka will be bypassed, and the lines that would normally go to us will go to the center boat instead. This is a huge relief, as I was a bit nervous about whether our cleats, which were designed for a 27-foot boat, would be able to handle the loads of these much larger boats. We still had our 4 line handlers though, and so Agatha nicely volunteered to help on the center boat. Once we were all situated, we didn't waste any more time and proceeded towards the first lock as a raft. We are all using our engines, but only the center boat is steering. As we got closer to the lock entrance, personnel with messenger lines were waiting along the canal walls. These lines have large monkey fists at the end and are thrown down to us so that our big blue lines can be passed up to them. Since we're not using Tarka's lines though, we pass these around all of Tarka's rigging and to the boat in the center. Once we were more or less secured in the center of the lock, the enormous doors began to close behind us so that fresh lake water could begin to fill the lock. This is probably the most dangerous part of the whole transit, as the currents produced by water rushing in to fill the lock are incredible. Not to mention turbulent. As a slip-up while taking up the slack as the boats rise could really spell disaster. Fortunately for us this evening, we operated like a well-oiled machine, and no major dramas ensued. And I think much of that credit goes to Agatha's handy line work. Mother Nature did decide to drizzle on us for the rest of the evening though. I guess we can't have it too easy. There are a total of 3 locks to get us up the 100 feet of elevation to lake level, and the whole process took several hours. We didn't film it, but we did feed our advisor his required hot meal in one of the locks. By the time we were done with the last lock, it was already dark. As we steamed out of the channel, we untied the lines that held us firmly to our raft buddies, and pushed off into Lake Gatun. Though it was too dark to film, we motored in the rain for about 30 minutes to the designated red buoys. After we were tied up and secured for the night, a pilot boat arrived to whisk our advisor away, and we'll get a new one tomorrow.
Yes, we made it.
With cold beers in hand, and honestly a little relieved that everything went so well for day one, we settled in for the evening. It is cramped inside Tarka's tiny cabin, but at least we're dry and sheltered from the rain outside. I've seen Vegas for sale advertised as being capable of sleeping 6 people. While they're technically correct, Arnaud and Anthony had to flip a coin to see who was going to be sleeping on the floor tonight. Unfortunately, with the rain, a hammock outside just wasn't an option.
Non, c'était pile.
No, what does that mean?
C'était pile.
What does it mean?
Bon, on la refait.
T'as essayé de m'embrouiller ou quoi?
We're at the translate.
Mais non, je t'ai pas essayé de t'embrouiller.
Poor Anthony, but at least the lake is calm and no one's going to be falling out of their bunks tonight. We awoke at dawn to a tranquil scene on the lake. It's pretty quiet out here. There are occasional howls of monkeys in the distance. And every now and then a passing tug makes things a little bit rolly. The rolling also ejected our bananas into the lake, but luckily Anthony wanted to go for a swim anyway, and kindly retrieved them for us. Yeah, how did they fall?
What?
How did they fall in the first
I don't know.
Did he come out of the hammock?
Yeah. I saw them floating. I was like, drama.
That's some big drama, banana drama. This is freshwater, and there are frequent sightings of crocodiles. After a peaceful morning and some breakfast, things started to happen fast, and before we knew it, our advisors were on board, and we were pushing off the mooring to get on our way. I'm not exactly sure why we were given 2 advisors today, but it happened to us on the Kiwi boat too. In that instance, one of them was a trainee, which didn't seem to be the situation today. Oh well, we prepared for this outcome, and this is quite frankly why we took so much weight off the boat. But still, we were so heavy that water was backfilling through our scuppers. Nonetheless, Tarka was still making more than 5 knots without having to work too hard, so I was pretty happy. It's a long way across the lake though, and the shortcut so often talked about in books and blogs is closed right now, as advisors will sometimes let boats unfurl a jenny on this passage. Instead, we're confined to the main channel with the big boys and are just trying to stay as far out of the way as possible. The other 2 boats we transited with yesterday are much faster than us and are scheduled to lock down without us. In fact, our advisors have informed us that we'd be locking down alone, so I guess it's good we have all 4 line handlers after all. There is a lot of traffic on the lake. I mean, it makes sense. There's no other good alternative to getting from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Well, other than going around the Horn. But unlike going around the Horn, we don't have to deal with the huge seas, a blowing gale, or freezing weather up here. In fact, today the weather has been perfect, and Tarka is chugging along quite nicely. After hours of motoring, we entered the narrowest part of the canal crossing, the Gaylord Cut. Here, it is absolutely essential to stay out of the way, and traffic is one way. Unfortunately, this is also where things started to go a little bit south for us. For reasons that aren't clear, there was a communication breakdown, and we were now supposed to be locking down with the boats that we locked up with yesterday. But they are at least a mile ahead of us, and already getting ready to enter the locks. So I put Tarka's engine to max revs to see if we could squeeze 6 knots against the headwind that we were now battling in the cut. To make matters worse, there was also a container ship getting ready to go in behind the raft we were supposed to be joining. Nonetheless, our advisors instructed us to go to the port of the large ship and join the raft in front. With a strong breeze, little room to maneuver, and 2 powerful tugs trying to hold this ship in place, this seemed pretty sketchy to me. Nusha and I know from past experiences that a tugboat operating even at low thrust pushes out a ton of current. And as luck would have it, just as we were about to round the bow, the tugboat was forced to maneuver to maintain its station, closing the slot we had for a safe passage in the channel, and now adding a strong current towards the shore. At this point, Nusha stopped recording so she could help keep Tarka and her crew safe. I immediately put Tarka in reverse because I knew if we drove through that current, we'd definitely be pushed onto the rocks not far away. And as we slowed down, Tarka's bow turned to the right, and our bowsprit slammed into the channel marker. After that, we promptly turned around and got the hell out of there. I think there are lessons to be learned here. I was a bit frustrated with our advisors that they instructed us to do something so silly when rafting up with the 2 other boats behind us was still an option. But I was also frustrated with myself. They might be advisors, but they're not the captain of this vessel. That's my job, and I should have recognized this as an unsafe plan and just forced the issue. And, of course, as it so happens, the new plan was to raft up with those other 2 boats. And we maneuvered to do so with no real further drama. I will never know why this wasn't the plan in the first place, but I'm just happy we're tied up to our friends on Ginger, and that we can now enter the locks all together in a safe way. The downlocking process is basically identical to the uplocking process. Messenger lines are thrown down to us, and our big blue lines are taken in by the workers on the wall. We're using Ginger's bow line and our stern line, so we'll have something to do this time. Once we were tied off and secured in the very front of the lock, a large tanker moved in behind us. I think they generally try to put small boats like us in front, so we're not tossed around by the powerful prop wash when it's time to advance. Downlocking is also a more pleasant experience, as there are far fewer currents to contend with, and it's easier to let slack out on the lines than it is to pull it in. So mostly it's just a lot of waiting around, as the water slowly drains out of the lock.
Yeah, real life.
Once the lock gates opened, we motored forward as a raft towards the next two locks, the Miraflores locks, about 30 minutes away. We stayed grouped as a raft to make things a little easier, which was a little bit sketchy at times. But we made it safely to the other side, and we were soon repeating the whole process. Once secured to the lock walls, I took this downtime to check on how much fuel we had left. The engine had been running for more than half a day so far, so it would be most unfortunate to run out of fuel on the home stretch. We also got one of those big heavy bags back from Ginger at this time, since we just so happened to be tied up to them.
I'll be waiting for I'm filming a vlog that I'm gonna upload in some years.
Ah, in some years.
Gathering content. You're filming
I
now.
am filming you, filming your vlog.
You want to film each other? That's no problem. Let's do it. Let's do it. How are you guys doing? Let's go.
As the lock gates opened, there was a bit of a delay as one of the doors failed to operate. But eventually a technician fixed the issue, and we were on our way to the last lock of our transit. It was nice to cherish this last little moment, as just beyond those gates is the Pacific Ocean, and, well, maybe that changes everything, or maybe it's all the same. But either way, new adventures are to be had in this new ocean, and it was a big, big moment for us to see these gates open.
They were asking me, I'm just gonna finish, get my diploma and doing something.
After exiting the locks, we separated from our raft and began our long trip to the anchorage as the sun began to set.
Yeah, that's okay.
You got navigation lights?
Yeah.
It's not 6 o'clock yet, but it's a good practice.
But the hard part was now behind us, and I was relieved that, all things considered, things went pretty well. No one was hurt, nothing was really damaged. Our crew was on point, and Tarka performed amazingly, though I shouldn't have ever doubted her. Crossing under the Bridge of the Americas is a symbolic completion of a canal transit, and there was a certain pride about this accomplishment that I think we will both keep with us forever. I mean, how many people get to say they took their boat through the Panama Canal? I think the day that we came through was just nice on that side, so that's all.
You have better shelter in this.
But symbolism aside, our transit is actually not over, and we still need to drop off our advisors, who will be picked up by a pilot boat just ahead.
No stop! No stop!
Keep going.
Talk much, but you guys. It was nice.
Nice meeting you. Tanto no puede pisar. Es donde sobra. Bien. Bien, ahí. Bien. Take care, huh?
Honestly, I was a bit relieved that we had Tarka back to ourselves. It's pretty stressful when two officials are telling you constantly how to manage your own boat, but I'm happy we had them, as we really couldn't have done it without them. In the dark, we motored around the causeway and to the Las Brisas anchorage on the other side. Our cameras were all out of batteries at this point, and we were just a little bit too exhausted to film. But don't think for a second that we didn't celebrate our accomplishments and our gratefulness for our crew with some cold beers.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats.
Next time on the Adventures of Tarka. We waste no time exploring our new ocean and set sail to the Las Perlas Islands. We find perfect little pockets of paradise all to ourselves. and become acquainted with the unsettled weather of the ITCZ.